HOA Karen Pepper sprayed my elderly aunt for using a scooter. Now she's facing assault charges. Dr. Camille Bryson, civil rights researcher, niece of the victim. She said my aunt's mobility scooter was an eyesore. Then she pepper sprayed her in the face, broad daylight, no hesitation. I was in the driveway. I saw everything. And I'll never forget the sound my Aunt Dolores made, the sharp, hollow gasp that told me something was very, very wrong. Dolores is 74. She's a retired teacher, a grandmother of 6, and a widow who moves a little slower these days thanks to arthritis and a stroke 2 years back. Her pride and joy, that cherry red electric scooter, her freedom, her legs, and her dignity, and Marlene Karen Kendricks, the self-proclaimed HOA enforcer of Hawthorne Bluffs, decided that scooter violated visual standards, so she attacked her in front of neighbors, in front of children, in front of me. And 3 hours later, she was in the back of a squad car, crying about feeling threatened. But for once, the law didn't buy it, the footage didn't lie, and neither did the bruises on my aunt's face. Part 1. She was wearing her church hat, that soft lavender one with the fabric flower on the side. Aunt Dolores didn't wear it unless she wanted to feel pretty. And that day she felt good. It was Sunday. Clear skies. 71 degrees. She'd gotten up early, dressed herself without help, and decided she wanted to roll through the neighborhood to drop off banana bread at Mrs. Nguyen's house. I offered to go with her, but she just smiled. "I'm fine, baby. I got my scooter charged and my hat pressed. Let an old lady enjoy the breeze." And then she wheeled down the sidewalk like she'd done 100 times since she moved into Hawthorne Bluffs. But this time, Marlene Kendricks was waiting. We lived in Hawthorne Bluffs for 8 months. I moved here after getting a fellowship at a nearby university, and I brought Aunt Dolores with me so I could care for her full time. The neighborhood had great curb appeal, brick homes, quiet streets, and supposedly a light-touch HOA. That light touch felt more like a chokehold the moment we moved in. Marlene Kendricks introduced herself within 48 hours. White, mid-50s, collagen-tight skin, and hair that hadn't moved since the Reagan administration. She carried a clipboard like a sword and spoke in HOA citations. "Your front porch mat exceeds the standard size. Your aunt's vehicle must be garage stored at all times. I noticed her scooter's color doesn't match your property scheme." We ignored most of it. I filed formal complaints when it escalated. I even confirmed with the county that her HOA leadership had no standing. Turns out she wasn't even on the official board anymore. She'd been voted out last year in a quiet recall that nobody talked about, but that didn't stop her. She printed fake notices, knocked on doors, called herself a compliance officer, and nobody pushed back. Until now. I was watering the azaleas when I saw it. Aunt Dolores had just turned the corner past Lot 7C, waving to the Harris twins on their bikes. That's when Marlene emerged from behind a hedge like some suburban villain in a sun hat. I couldn't hear what she said, but I saw her body language. Sharp, aggressive. One hand on her hip, the other pointing. Aunt Dolores stopped. She nodded, then shook her head, tried to move around her. Marlene lunged, reached into her bag, sprayed something. Aunt Dolores screamed. I dropped the hose and sprinted. By the time I reached her, Aunt Dolores was gasping, eyes shut tight, hands over her face. Her scooter had tipped sideways against the curb. The banana bread was smashed on the pavement. Marlene stood there like nothing happened, holding a pink canister of pepper spray. "She was coming at me with that thing," she snapped. "It's non-compliant and dangerous. She almost ran me over." "You just pepper sprayed a disabled senior citizen," I said, my voice shaking with fury. Marlene didn't flinch. "She doesn't have ADA clearance for that device in communal spaces." "You don't need ADA clearance to use a scooter on a sidewalk," Marlene sneered. "This is HOA managed ground. I'm within my rights." Then she looked at me like I was the threat, like I was the one violating some unspoken suburban order. 2 neighbors had come running by then, Mrs. Nguyen, who'd been expecting the banana bread, and a teenager named Malik who lived on the corner. Malik had caught the whole thing on video. He was already uploading it. Mrs. Nguyen was on the phone with 911. Marlene started backing away. She's faking. You people love to exaggerate. My fist clenched. Don't say another word. The paramedics arrived within 6 minutes. Aunt Dolores was treated on site. Her eyes were inflamed, skin blotched. Her blood pressure was through the roof. She was shaking. When the officers arrived, Marlene tried to play the victim. She was a projectile. She said, "Those machines can be used as weapons." I was standing my ground. I handed the officer my phone. She sprayed her without provocation. "It's all on camera." The officer watched the clip, didn't say a word, just walked over and cuffed Marlene where she stood. She shrieked, "You're arresting me. Me, this is harassment. That woman doesn't belong here." "Yes," the officer said flatly. "You're under arrest for assault of a disabled person." Cheers broke out on the block. I looked at Aunt Dolores, still holding my hand. "Is it over?" she whispered. "Not even close," I said. "This is just the beginning." That night, the video hit 100,000 views. By morning, it was on national news. But for me, the story didn't start there. It started years earlier, in cities across the country, with stories just like this, unpunished, unreported, and unresolved. Except this time, I had the training, I had the platform, and I had every intention of burning Marlene's entire fake empire to the ground. For Aunt Dolores, for everyone she silenced. Part 2. It took just one act of violence to crack the facade. But when I looked closer, it wasn't a crack, it was a fault line. Running deep, rotten all the way through. While Aunt Dolores rested with cold compresses on her eyes and steroid drops prescribed for chemical exposure, I did what I do best. I investigated, not just as her niece, but as a civil rights researcher trained to spot systemic rot hiding beneath policy and pretense. And what I uncovered was worse than I imagined. I started with the so-called Hawthorne Bluffs HOA. Marlene had pepper sprayed my aunt claiming she was enforcing a rule. Problem was, there was no rule. And as I dug deeper, I realized there was no real HOA anymore. The original HOA had legally dissolved 3 years earlier after a failed vote to renew the charter. But Marlene didn't let it die. She'd resurrected it like a suburban Frankenstein, issuing fake violations, collecting fees under a shell compliance trust, and intimidating homeowners into obedience. How? With fear, with paperwork that looked real, and with a whisper campaign that said, if you fought back, they'd come for you next. I spent 2 sleepless nights collecting documents, scouring local deed records, archived city council notes, and digital complaint logs. What I found made my stomach turn over. $43,000 collected in compliance fees over the past 24 months, deposited into a personal account linked to Marlene's name under a DBA titled Neighborhood Standards Enforcement Group, dozens of unfiled citations printed with a logo that mimicked the former HOA's but bore a different EIN number. A forged community guidelines addendum with a page that specifically banned mobility devices exceeding 24 inches wide from common sidewalks. It wasn't just fake, it was strategically targeted, because the only mobility device in the entire neighborhood was Aunt Dolores' scooter. I knew I couldn't do this alone, so I reached out to a friend, Daniel Knox, an attorney for a nonprofit that specializes in housing discrimination cases. He answered on the second ring. "You said you had a story." He said, "Make me angry." I did more than that. By the time I finished showing him what I had: PDFs, videos, voice messages, and a spreadsheet I'd titled The Compliance Files, he was pacing his kitchen. "This is an ADA violation, civil rights violation, impersonation of legal authority, wire fraud hell. Camille, this woman might have committed federal crimes." I smiled grimly. "She's about to find out how serious that is." We filed a cease and desist against Marlene and a motion to freeze her assets related to any compliance enforcement activities. But the real war was going to be fought in the open. So I published the first part of the compliance files on my professional blog. No clickbait, just facts. The woman who invented her own HOA and pepper sprayed a senior to enforce it, it exploded. The video of the attack was reposted alongside my article. News sites picked it up. Lawyers contacted me. People from other neighborhoods started sharing eerily similar stories, phony citations, racial targeting, threats for minor violations. Turns out, Marlene was part of a private Facebook group called Suburban Order Watchers, a coalition of former HOA enforcers, mostly older white women, who believed in taking back their streets from chaos. They had templates, manuals, even badge designs. One name kept popping up in the shared post: District Liaison, Karen A. Kendrick's Marlene's full name. She wasn't just acting alone. She was part of a broader pattern. And now, we had proof. But something else began to happen too. Something I didn't expect. People in Hawthorne Bluffs, our neighbors, began talking. They started coming by with stories. Mrs. Nguyen, whose garden gnome had been smashed and cited for cultural clutter. The Harris family and fined $100 for putting a "We Stand with Uvalde" sign in their yard. Malik's mother, who had received 3 noise complaints in 1 week because her son practiced violin after 6 p.m. Every story echoed the same message: Marlene didn't just police lawns. She policed lives. So we held a meeting in the community park where Marlene once threatened to build a surveillance shed. We called it a neighborhood truth night. I didn't bring tea and muffins. I brought documents, testimonies, receipts, and I told them this isn't about one pepper-sprayed elder. It's about a system of harassment wrapped in the false flag of community order. They listened. And when I passed around the folder labeled Invalid HOA Claims, I watched their faces fall, line after line, names, amounts, violations. None of them legal. Someone whispered, "She fined me for wind chimes." Another, "She made me cry over a sun chair." Another, "She said I was too visible for a single mother." By the end of the meeting, we had over 60 residents ready to sign a joint legal complaint. We called it the Bluffs Petition for Justice. It wasn't just about money. It was about saying, we see you, we remember, and we're done being silent. I got home that night and found Aunt Dolores sitting by the window. Her eyes were still healing, but her spirit wasn't broken. "I watched you on the live stream," she said, smiling faintly. "Your mama would be proud." I sat beside her, tired to my bones. "She never had to fight like this," I said. Dolores shook her head. "No, baby. She just didn't have you around to win it." Marlene's world was shrinking now. But we weren't done. Because when you pull back the curtain on injustice, you don't stop at the dust. You rip out the whole rot. Part 3. It takes less than 6 minutes to spray someone with pepper spray, but it takes weeks, sometimes years, to unwind the system that allowed it. And now, I had that system backed into a corner. Marlene Kendrick's HOA fantasy wasn't just collapsing, it was about to be exposed. Not just in front of our neighborhood, but on a state and maybe even federal stage. We started with the city council. I contacted Councilwoman Denise Morales, a policy reformer known for challenging outdated zoning codes and calling out illegal HOA overreach. I forwarded her our evidence packet labeled the compliance files, including bank records, HOA impersonation complaints, audio from neighbors, and footage of Aunt Dolores being pepper sprayed. Denise called me back an hour later. "I've read thousands of pages of housing complaints," she said. "Yours reads like a manifesto and it's airtight." That Friday, she added a new item to the public agenda. Item 7C, Community Complaint Against Unregistered HOA Activity in Hawthorne Bluffs. It was open to the public, broadcast live, and I was invited to testify. The hearing chamber was packed. Rows of residents from Hawthorne Bluffs filled the back wall, some clutching copies of the petition, others holding printed screenshots of Marlene's fake citations. Aunt Dolores sat beside me in a wide-brimmed hat and new sunglasses. Her scooter gleamed like armor. Marlene was there, too. She wore a gray suit and a grim expression, seated next to her attorney, some firm-chinned man with a soft handshake and a stiff voice. He whispered constantly in her ear, while she sat straight and tense, her mouth a single thin line. Councilwoman Morales gave me the floor. "I'm Dr. Camille Bryson." I began. "My Aunt, Dolores Bryson, is a disabled woman who was pepper sprayed by a neighbor claiming to act on behalf of a non-existent HOA. I paused. Let the silence stretch. But this isn't just about my aunt. This is about a weaponized lie, an invented system of authority that has robbed people in our neighborhood of peace, dignity, and even their health. Then I laid it out. The fake citations, the unregistered enforcement patrols, the racial disparities in who got fined, the forged guidelines restricting scooters and non-standard decorations, and the bank account that had quietly siphoned thousands under the title Neighborhood Standards Enforcement Group. I'm not here for vengeance, I said. I'm here for accountability. Because if Marlene Kendricks can do this with no oversight, then how many others are doing the same under the cover of order? The room was dead still. Then someone clapped. Then more. Then all, even the city attorney clapped. The fallout was immediate. The city issued a formal cease and desist order to Marlene Kendricks, banning her from issuing any form of community directive, posting signage, or collecting fees within city limits without certified legal HOA status. But we weren't stopping at city level. Daniel Knox filed a civil suit under federal ADA statutes and Fair Housing Act violations. He submitted 73 affidavits from Hawthorne Bluffs residents and documented a pattern of discrimination. 87% of fines issued by Marlene's fake HOA were against residents of color. 90% of those who received threats of forced compliance were elderly, disabled, or single-parent households. 0% of fines issued to white residents were enforced more than once. We didn't just have testimony. We had proof of intent in email from Marlene's account uncovered by a resident's legal discovery request, where she wrote, "If we don't keep a tight grip on the community, it's going to look like downtown." She wasn't talking about flowers. She was talking about people. 2 days later, we were invited to a live segment on a major news network. They titled it, "Neighborhood Tyranny: How Fake HOAs Are Targeting America's Most Vulnerable." I sat next to Aunt Dolores in the studio. She was nervous. "I'm not a speaker," she said. "You don't have to be," I whispered. "You're the reason people are listening." The host introduced us, rolled the security footage, the spray, the scream, the silence. Aunt Dolores looked down at her lap. Then, when asked what she wanted to say to Marlene, she lifted her head and said, "I forgive you, but I won't forget what you tried to do to me." And with that, the segment went viral. But the most powerful moment came from a place I least expected. A knock on our door. It was Mr. Shapiro, an older white man who'd lived 2 doors down since the 90s. He had always nodded politely, but never spoke more than a few words. Now, he looked me square in the eye. "I knew what Marlene was doing," he said. "I saw it. I just didn't think it was my business. I was wrong." Then he handed me a small notebook. In it, pages of notes he'd taken over the last year, dates, names, detail, copies of fake fines he'd quietly collected after retrieving them from his neighbors' mailboxes, afraid they'd throw them out in shame. "I didn't know what to do," he said. "But maybe you do." That notebook cracked everything wide open. Because on page 17, under the heading Visitor Logs, was a list of times and dates Marlene had claimed to be away on community patrol. But cross-checked with traffic camera footage, she wasn't in the neighborhood at all. She was at a strip mall printing store ordering boxes of fake citation pads under different names. It was premeditated. It was coordinated. It was criminal. So when the district attorney called and asked if we wanted to escalate the case to criminal fraud and harassment charges, we didn't hesitate. Marlene was arrested again. This time, not just for assault, but for systemic impersonation, elder abuse, and civil rights interference. Her mugshot made the evening news. No clipboard, no smile, just a hollow stare. At the next neighborhood meeting, no one mentioned her name. Instead, we passed a resolution to establish the Hawthorne Community Care Network, an all-volunteer group trained in de-escalation, conflict resolution, and advocacy for vulnerable residents. No fines, no power, just protection. And on the agenda first line item, we, the residents of Hawthorne Bluffs, reject fear as a tool of governance, Aunt Dolores sat front row. Her hat was lavender again, her scooter polished, and when she rolled up to the podium to speak, the room fell silent. "I used to think I was in the way," she said. "Like if I kept quiet, I'd keep the peace. But I learned something after that woman sprayed me. You can't stay quiet when your dignity's on fire." People stood, applauded. Some cried. I did too, because exposure isn't just about what we tear down. It's about what we shine a light on, so no one has to live in that darkness again. Part 4. They took her clipboard away in court. Not symbolically, literally. Marlene tried to bring it with her into the arraignment, same worn pink plastic clipboard she'd used to write fake citations, wave at children, and document which undesirables needed corrective notices. The bailiff stopped her at the security desk. "Ma'am, no external materials. That includes weapons?" Marlene scoffed. "It's a clipboard." The bailiff raised an eyebrow. Exactly. That was the moment I knew her world had already fallen, because she didn't see it as a tool anymore. She saw it as a shield, and for the first time, it couldn't protect her. It had been 3 weeks since her second arrest. The charges now included elder abuse, fraudulent impersonation of a legal body, harassment under OTA Title II, wire fraud, and civil rights obstruction under federal housing law. Each charge carried real weight, and even if she didn't get the maximum sentence, the message was already loud and clear. Your clipboard empire is gone. The neighborhood changed almost overnight. With Marlene silenced, something beautiful began to bloom in the space she once controlled choice. People put up wind chimes again, painted their shutters bold colors, installed porch swings and solar lights. Some even dared to plant the wrong flowers, sunflowers, instead of the HOA-approved boxwoods. But the biggest change people talked, there were block parties, sidewalk potlucks, dog walking groups that didn't whisper nervously about code violations. Fear had been replaced with something Marlene never could have controlled: joy. And it was contagious. I'd almost forgotten what normal could feel like. Then came the deposition. The court had granted us the right to depose Marlene for the class action civil suit. The goal wasn't just justice, it was recorded accountability. When she walked in, she looked smaller. Gone were the pearls and pleated slacks. She wore a gray cardigan and flats. Her hair wasn't sprayed into place. It was pulled back in a limp ponytail. She didn't have her clipboard, just a stack of papers clutched to her chest, like she was afraid they'd vanish. Her lawyer, now a different one, this one more rattled than rehearsed, warned us, "Miss Kendricks is under emotional distress. Please proceed carefully." Daniel and I exchanged a look. We didn't nod. We just began. "Ms. Kendricks," Daniel said, voice even. "Is it true that the HOA you claim to represent had no legal standing after May of last year?" She fumbled through papers. There was confusion. The bylaws were unclear. He showed her a city record. "This is the official dissolution certificate, signed and recorded." "Were you aware of this silence, Miss Kendricks?" "Yes," she said, almost a whisper. "And yet you continued issuing citations." Another pause. "I was trying to maintain the standards." I leaned forward. Standards for what? Marlene Lawns or people? Her eyes flicked to me. They narrowed. "Some of us care about keeping the community respectable." I didn't blink. "And how does pepper spraying a disabled elder help with that?" She flinched. Daniel continued. "Is it true you forged HOA documents to create the illusion of authority?" She didn't answer. So he showed her the receipts, the emails, the fake EIN registrations, the logs from the print shop, and finally the spreadsheet we'd recovered from her desktop via court subpoena, titled Disruption Index. It had names, scores, reasons. Malik Harris, teenager. Noise risk, possible music violations. Mrs. Nguyen, decorative clutter, potential foreign signage. Dolores Bryson, mobility eyesore, slow reaction, should be moved. And mine, Camille Bryson, educated, dangerous, record everything. That was the moment she broke. Not with a scream, not with tears. She just lowered her head and whispered, "I thought I was helping." Daniel was calm. "Helping who?" "Ms. Kendricks." She didn't answer, because the answer was herself. After the deposition, the judge issued an interim ruling. All victims of Marlene's false violations were to receive full restitution, including refunds, legal fee coverage, and public acknowledgement in a formal community meeting. We didn't clap, we didn't cheer, we just exhaled. The following week, the Hawthorne Community Assembly was held on the school green. Every resident was invited. The new leadership team, elected democratically, set up tables for resources renters' rights, ADA compliance, local mutual aid, and free legal clinics. Joy and I set up a booth with hot tea and voter registration forms. She wore her lavender hat again. People stopped by just to hug her, to say thank you, to cry. A little girl handed her a drawing of a scooter with a heart on the side. "You're a hero," she said. Aunt Dolores teared up. "Not me, sugar," she said. "My niece is the one who slayed the dragon." I shook my head. "You gave her the reason." And Marlene. She pled guilty to 1 felony and 2 misdemeanors as part of a deal. No prison, but 6 months house arrest, mandatory civil rights education, and a ban from serving on any HOA board again in the state. She'll live in her house with no power to control others, which I think is its own kind of sentence, especially when her clipboard's gone. At the next neighborhood event, we burned something. Not in anger, in ceremony. Someone brought a fake HOA notice. Another brought a printout of the disruption index. I brought a copy of Marlene's original welcome packet with her forged logo. We fed them to the fire, one by one. Then someone added an old clipboard. The crowd cheered as it curled, blackened, and vanished in smoke. Aunt Dolores raised her tea and toasted, "To peace in porches, and for the first time since moving here." I knew we were truly home. Because when people stop whispering and start witnessing, when fear gives way to fellowship, when clipboards fall and truth rises, that's when a neighborhood becomes a community. Part 5. The first time we moved into Hawthorne Bluffs, the welcome packet was slipped under our door in a sealed manila envelope. No one greeted us in person, no handshake, no cake, just rules, restrictions, and a veiled threat wrapped in pleasantries. "We hope you will find our community orderly and consistent with your values." I remember rereading that line twice, unsure if it was a warning or an invitation. Now, 1 year later, I was the one writing the welcome letter, and it felt like rewriting history. Hawthorne Bluffs had been through something ugly, but what came after was honest. Marlene Kendricks no longer had a title, a badge, or even a voice at our meetings. She was serving out her 6-month sentence with GPS monitoring and 0 community engagement. Her house stood quiet, now a relic of a failed regime. In her place, something new had emerged, a community council made up of volunteers, veterans, retired teachers, single parents, renters, and first-time homeowners. No one in charge. No enforcers, just people working side by side. We called ourselves the Hawthorne Neighbors Collective. We didn't write rules. We wrote principles. And the first of them was people come before policies. The new welcome packet wasn't an envelope. It was a basket. Inside, a handwritten note. A map of the neighborhood with marked walking trails and picnic spots. Contact numbers for volunteers offering help with groceries, errands, and yard work. And a small card that read, "You belong here. No conditions, no clipboard required." And for the first time, Aunt Dolores added something of her own, a slice of her banana bread, wrapped in foil, tied with a lavender ribbon. "I figure they ought to know what kindness tastes like," she said with a wink. We gave out 7 baskets that month. The most memorable went to a young trans woman named Maya, who moved into Lot 9D with a little rescue dog and a hesitant smile. Her hands trembled when she accepted the basket. "I kept telling myself not to get too comfortable," she whispered. "HOAs don't like people like me." I took her hand gently. "This one does, because it's not an HOA. It's a home. She cried. So did I. Word spread fast, not just about us, but about what we'd done. The blog post I wrote, the one that started it all, had passed 2.4 million reads. Journalists called daily. Activists reached out. HOAs in other states began holding emergency votes to audit their own practices. One even dismantled itself after residents used the compliance files as a legal model. Daniel Knox helped set up a national database for tracking illegal or predatory HOA behavior. We named it the Bryson Standard. I never asked for that, but I accepted it, because if my aunt's pain meant someone else's freedom, then let the name stick. But the moment I'll never forget came on the 1-year anniversary of the pepper spray attack. We didn't plan a protest. We held a parade. It was small, just a few floats, a marching band from the local high school, and a caravan of scooters, wheelchairs, walkers, and strollers. We called it the Accessibility Walk, and it wound through the neighborhood with banners that read, "All are welcome. Mobility is not a menace." We rolled together. Aunt Dolores led the procession. Of course, lavender hat, new scooter, big smile. She held a paper sign on her lap that said, "Still rolling, still rising." I walked beside her, one hand on the armrest, the other carrying a clipboard not with citations, with stories, every one of them real. That night, we gathered in the community park where it all began. The sun set golden over the gazebo. Joyful noise filled the air, children playing, music humming, neighbors laughing. It no longer felt like survival. It felt like living. We read from our community values charter, adopted that week. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We value difference, not fear it. We do not fine, we help. We do not surveil, we see. And we hold power only if we're willing to share it. Then someone called for Aunt Dolores to say a few words. She shook her head at first. Then she drove her scooter slowly to the front, cleared her throat, and said, "I was once made to feel like I didn't belong, like my wheels made me a burden. But now, when I roll down this street, I see chalk drawings on the sidewalk. I hear wind chimes ringing, and I feel something that Marlene never gave us." She paused. Permission to exist in peace. Tears fell. So did 100 shoulders from years of carrying too much silence. Later that evening, I walked the block alone, clutching a copy of the final welcome letter. I passed the house that used to belong to fear, the one where Marlene had yelled at my aunt, claimed a scooter was an eyesore, sprayed her in the face like she was a stray. The lights were off, curtains drawn, no clipboard in sight. I didn't stop. I kept walking, past the laughter, past the front yards blooming again, past the porch where a new family was painting flower pots with their daughter. They waved, and I waved back. When I got home, I opened my laptop and added a final line to the digital version of the welcome letter. Just below the heading, "Welcome to Hawthorne Bluffs." A neighborhood once broken by control, now rebuilt by kindness. I typed, "We've had our share of clipboards here, but we prefer casseroles." Then I hit publish, because this isn't just a story about what was taken from us. It's a story about what we reclaimed, about the power of one scream, one video, one woman who refused to stay down, and one community that learned finally to rise. The turn. Dorian.